Silence isn't empty. It's where the truth waits to be heard. The house was too quiet, and that was the first thing that felt wrong. Not the kind of quiet that came after midnight when the last light clicked off and the guards settled into routine, but a different kind, thick, deliberate, like the air itself was holding its breath. I stood barefoot on the cold marble floor of the west hallway, a basket of freshly folded sheets resting against my hip, listening to something that wasn't there. No footsteps. No voices over the security radios. Not even the faint hum of the hallway camera. That was what made my chest tighten. The camera light, always blinking red, steady and predictable, was dark, completely dead. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, counting seconds in my head the way my father had taught me when I was a kid back in Queens. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Still nothing. That was the problem. In a house like this, nothing never meant safe. It meant something had already been handled. Or worse, something was waiting. I shifted the basket slightly and took one step forward, slow enough that the floor wouldn't echo. The marble here carried sound if you weren't careful. I had learned that in my first week. Learned where the soft spots were, where the reflections in the glass frames could show movement behind you without turning your head. You didn't survive in a place like this by being loud. You survived by paying attention. Then I heard it. Faint metallic click. Not sharp. Not accidental. Controlled. It came from the west wing. Past the unused playroom that hadn't been touched since Noah outgrew it. My fingers tightened around the edge of the basket. Someone was in that part of the house. Someone who knew exactly how much noise to make. My first instinct should have been to call security. That was the rule. That was what anyone normal would do. But something stopped me, because if I could hear that sound, then whoever made it already knew where security was. Already knew how they moved. Calling them wouldn't stop anything. It would only let whoever was inside know they'd been noticed. I set the basket down slowly on a side table, careful not to let the fabric shift too loudly. My heart was beating faster now, but my breathing stayed steady. In, through my nose, out through my mouth, just like before. Just like years ago when my father started checking the locks twice every night, when he lowered his voice on phone calls like someone might be listening through the walls. He used to say the same thing every time I asked why. When things go quiet, Evie, it means something is about to move. I didn't understand it back then. I understood it now. I stepped into the west wing, keeping close to the wall where the shadows were deeper. I didn't turn on the lights. Light made you visible. Darkness, if you used it right, made you invisible. The playroom door was slightly open. Shouldn't have been. I pushed it just enough to look inside. Everything looked normal at first glance. Too normal. The shelves were clean. The rug perfectly flat. But then my eyes adjusted, and I saw it. The toy train on the floor shifted just a few inches off its usual track. The window latch scratched, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. And near the baseboard, a faint trail of dried mud. Not random dirt. Placed. Deliberate. I knelt slowly, reaching for the toy train, and turned it over in my hands. Something rattled inside. My pulse spiked. I opened the compartment with my thumb and found a folded receipt tucked into the hollow space. Manhattan hardware store. Dated tonight. I flipped it over. Handwritten in quick, sharp strokes. He wasn't supposed to come home tonight. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a break-in. This was a plan. And somewhere inside this house, someone already knew the plan had changed. I learned a long time ago that danger does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it settles in first and waits for you to notice what has changed. I kept the receipt folded in my palm as I stood there in the dim light of the playroom, the edges of the paper pressing into my skin like it was trying to remind me this was real. He was not supposed to come home tonight. That meant whoever wrote this had inside information. Not a guess. Not luck. A schedule. Plan. I exhaled slowly and forced myself to think instead of panic. Panic made mistakes. Mistakes got people hurt. My father used to say that too, right before everything in our life started. Shifting in ways I did not understand back then. He had been an accountant, the kind of man who believed numbers told the truth even when people did not. I remember the smell of coffee always lingering in our small kitchen in Queens, stacks of files on the table, his glasses sliding down his nose as he worked late into the night. It had been normal, predictable, safe. Until it was not. First, it was small things. He started locking the door twice, then 3 times. He checked the windows before bed even when I told him it was not necessary. He stopped taking calls in front of me. He would step into the hallway, lower his voice, and when he came back, he always looked like he was trying to solve something that did not want to be solved. I had asked him once if we were in trouble. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. He said, "Not if we pay attention." That was the last year we had together. The accident report said it was late night, wet roads, loss of control. That was the official version. The one printed in clean black ink. But I remembered the way he had been acting before it happened. Careful, quiet, listening. The same way I was standing now in a house that did not belong to me, holding a piece of paper that should not exist. I slipped the receipt into my pocket and stood up slowly, scanning the room again, this time with purpose. Whoever had been here was not rushing. Nothing was overturned. Nothing was broken. This was not someone searching for valuables or making a mistake. This was someone placing pieces exactly where they wanted them to be. That thought made something cold settle in my chest. Because if this was staged, then it was meant to be found. And if it was meant to be found, then the question was not who left it. The question was for who. I stepped back into the hallway and listened again. Still nothing. No guards passing. No distant footsteps. No radios crackling with routine updates. The system was quiet because it had been made quiet. I moved toward the main corridor, keeping my pace slow, controlled, counting each step in my head. The Moretti estate was designed to impress, but it was also designed to conceal. Long stretches of polished floors, mirrored walls, corners that let you see without being seen. I had memorized more of it than I ever intended to. At first, it had been about doing my job well, knowing where everything was, how everything worked. But over time, it became something else. A habit. A way of understanding the space I was living in. Because houses like this did not just hold people. They held secrets. I reached the intersection that led toward the front entrance and paused, my hand brushing lightly against the wall, as I leaned just enough to catch the reflection in a framed photograph across from me. The driveway lights flickered through the glass. Then I saw it. Headlights cutting through the darkness outside. A car pulling in earlier than scheduled. My stomach dropped before my mind could catch up. Adrian Moretti was home. Too early. Exactly what the message said was not supposed to happen. Which meant whoever set this in motion was now adjusting. Somewhere inside this house, someone was already changing the plan. And now I had a choice. Stay where I was and pretend I had seen nothing. Or move before they did. I pushed myself off the wall and started toward the front of the house. Faster now but still careful, my pulse steady, my thoughts sharper than they had been in years. Because for the first time since my father died, I was not guessing anymore. I was certain. This was not coincidence. This was not bad luck. This was the moment everything connected. And if I was right, then whatever was coming next was not meant to be stopped. It was meant to succeed, unless someone changed it first. I have learned that timing is never accidental in a house built on control, and when something happens too early, it is never a mistake, it is a signal. The headlights cut across the front windows like a blade of white light, slow and deliberate, reflecting off the polished floors and glass surfaces as Adrian Moretti's car rolled up the long driveway. He was not supposed to be here for another 2 hours. That was not a guess anymore. That was written in someone else's plan, in ink that had not been meant for me to see. My feet moved before my thoughts finished catching up, carrying me down the corridor toward the front entrance, each step measured but faster now, the quiet of the house pressing in tighter with every second. I passed the main staircase and paused just long enough to listen again, hoping for something, anything that would break the stillness, but it remained unchanged, heavy and unnatural, like the entire estate had been placed on pause. No guards passing through the rotation points. No distant murmur of conversation. Even the usual hum of the ventilation system felt muted, like it had been turned down just enough to disappear. That was when it clicked. This was not just about someone getting inside. This was about controlling what could be heard once they were already here. I reached the corner before the entrance hall and leaned slightly, catching the reflection of the front doors in the tall mirror across from me. The car door outside opened. A figure stepped out, tall, composed, unmistakable even in shadow. Adrian. His movements were precise, unhurried, like nothing in the world could surprise him. That confidence made something twist in my chest, because for the first time since I had started working here, I knew something he did not. And that meant if I waited even 1 second too long, I would be the reason everything went wrong. The front door unlocked with a soft mechanical click, the kind you would miss if you were not already listening for it. The door opened inward, and a rush of cool night air slipped into the house along with him. I stepped out from the hallway just enough to intercept his path, but not enough to make noise, my pulse steady even as my mind raced through possibilities. If the message was right, then someone inside already knew he was not supposed to be here, which meant they were either watching the entrance or waiting for confirmation. And the easiest confirmation would be sound. A voice, command, a signal. Adrian took 1 step inside, his hand already moving toward his phone, probably to alert security or call for an update, his instincts built on control and immediate response. I crossed the remaining distance in 2 quick, silent steps and reached for his wrist before he could speak. The contact was brief but firm, enough to stop him, enough to break the motion he had already committed to. His eyes snapped to mine instantly, sharp and assessing, the kind of look that measured threat in less than a second. I did not give him time to question it. I leaned in just enough that my voice would not carry beyond us. Every word shaped carefully, barely louder than a breath. Stay silent. The words hung between us, fragile and absolute. His expression did not change, but I could feel the shift, the moment his instincts collided with something unexpected. I tightened my grip just slightly, enough to hold his attention, then added the only explanation that mattered. If you speak, they will know you are here. For a fraction of a second, nothing moved. Not him, not me, not the air around us. Then something in his gaze sharpened, not with anger, not with confusion, but with calculation. He did not pull away. He did not call out. He did not reach for his phone again. Instead, he lowered his hand slowly, deliberately, his attention fully on me now, as if weighing the risk of trusting a stranger against the certainty of something being wrong. I released his wrist but did not step back, keeping my voice low, steady, forcing myself to stay focused on what came next instead of the fact that I had just stopped a man who was used to never being stopped. There is someone inside, I whispered, my eyes flicking briefly toward the darkened hallway behind me before returning to his. And they were not expecting you tonight. That was the moment everything shifted. Because I saw it in his expression, the exact second the information stopped being a possibility and became a problem he could not ignore. And in that silence, in that narrow space between what was planned and what was happening, we were already running out of time. Trust is not built in moments like this, it is measured in what someone chooses not to do. Adrian did not speak. He did not call for his men. He did not even glance toward the security panel beside the door. Instead, he watched me, completely still, as if the entire world had narrowed down to the space between my words and his decision. That silence was not empty. It was controlled, intentional, and somehow it made everything feel even more dangerous. I could hear my own breathing now, steady but louder than I wanted it to be, the faint sound echoing in the high ceiling above us. I forced myself to slow it down, to match the rhythm of the moment instead of breaking it. This was not the time to rush. This was the time to be precise. I leaned slightly closer, keeping my voice low enough that it would not travel past his shoulder. They changed something inside the system, I whispered. The cameras in the west hallway are down, and there are no guard rotations. That should not happen here. His eyes flickered for a fraction of a second, not in surprise, but in recognition. He knew exactly what that meant. I continued before he could interrupt, because hesitation would only create space for doubt. There is a message, I said, my hand slipping into my pocket just enough to press against the folded receipt. It said, "You were not supposed to come home tonight. That is why they are here." This time, the shift in him was undeniable. Not fear, not uncertainty, something colder, something sharper, calculation layered over instinct. He stepped past me without a sound, his movements slower now, deliberate, as if he was adjusting himself to a different set of rules. Not the rules he controlled, the rules someone else had already set in motion. I turned and followed, staying close but not touching him again, aware that whatever this was, it had already moved beyond a single mistake. We reached the edge of the main corridor, and he stopped, just enough to angle his body toward me without fully turning. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, controlled and even. "Who have you told?" "No one," I answered immediately, because I knew that question was not about information. It was about risk. He studied me for a second longer, then gave a slight nod, not of agreement but of acceptance. That was enough. For now. I pointed toward the west wing, my voice still low, steady. "They came through the playroom window. There is mud on the floor, but it is clean, like it was placed there. And the message was hidden inside a toy." He followed my gaze, then shifted his attention back to me, something unreadable passing through his expression. "You checked all of this alone," he said quietly. It was not a question. I nodded once. I did not think there was time to wait. Another pause. Short. Measured. Then he asked the one question that mattered most. "What do you think they are waiting for?" I hesitated for half a second, not because I did not know the answer, but because saying it out loud would make it real in a way that could not be taken back. I met his eyes, forcing myself not to look away. "Not you," I said softly. The words hung there for a moment, suspended between us. Then I added, just as quietly, "Your son." Everything changed again. Not in the room. Not in the air. In him. It was subtle, almost invisible, but I felt it the same way I had felt the silence earlier. A shift beneath the surface. The kind that did not explode outward, but settled deeper, heavier. Adrian Moretti did not react the way other people would. He did not raise his voice. He did not move faster. If anything, he became even more still, more controlled, like every part of him had narrowed into focus. He looked past me, toward the upper level of the house where Noah's room was located, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw something that was not power, not authority, not distance. I saw intention sharpen into something personal. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter than before, but there was something beneath it now that had not been there a moment ago. "Show me," he said. And just like that, without another word, without another sound, we turned and moved into the darkness of the house, following a plan that neither of us had created, but both of us now understood we had to break. The fastest way to understand danger is not to chase it, but to get ahead of it. I did not wait for Adrian to take the lead this time. I moved first, turning down the narrow service corridor that ran parallel to the main staircase, the one most people in the house forgot even existed. The lights here were dimmer, softer, designed for staff, not for display, and the carpet muted our steps completely. I could feel him behind me, close enough that I did not need to look back to know he was there, matching my pace, adjusting without question. That alone told me everything had already shifted. A man like Adrian Moretti did not follow directions easily, not from anyone, not ever. I stopped at the corner just before the stairwell and raised my hand slightly, signaling him to pause. He did. No hesitation. No sound. I leaned just enough to catch the reflection from the polished metal edge of a maintenance panel across the hall. Still nothing. No movement. No shadows crossing where they should not be. But that was not reassuring. That was confirmation. They were not moving because they were waiting. I turned back toward him, keeping my voice low. "If they were here for you, they would already be closer to the entrance," I whispered. "But they are not, which means they are positioned where it matters most." His gaze did not waver. "Upstairs," he said quietly. I nodded. "But not the main stairs. They will expect that." I pushed open the service door slowly, just enough to slip through, the hinges barely making a sound. The stairwell beyond was narrow, enclosed, the kind that carried sound upward if you were careless. I stepped onto the first stair, placing my weight carefully along the edge where it would not creak, then continued upward, one step at a time, counting each one in my head. 12 steps to the landing, 8 more to the second floor. I had memorized it without realizing I had. At the top, I stopped again, listening. This time, there was something. Not a sound exactly, more like a presence. A shift in the air that did not belong. I felt Adrian move slightly closer behind me, not touching, but near enough that I could sense his attention sharpen. I pushed the door open a fraction of an inch and looked out into the hallway. The lights were on here, soft and warm, the way they always were at night. Everything looked normal. Too normal. I stepped out and turned left, moving toward Noah's room, each step controlled, each breath measured. The door was closed. That was the first sign. It was never fully closed at night. Mrs. Holloway always left it slightly open so she could hear if Noah woke up. I reached the handle and paused, my hand hovering just above it. I glanced back at Adrian. His expression had not changed, but there was something in his eyes now, something that was not there before. Not fear, not doubt, something quieter, more focused. I turned the handle slowly and pushed the door open just enough to see inside. The bed was empty, the covers undisturbed. The room looked untouched, like no one had been there for hours. For a single second, the world seemed to tilt. Then I stepped inside, moving quickly now, scanning the corners, the closet, the bathroom door. Nothing. No sign of struggle. No sign of movement. Just absence. I turned back toward Adrian, my voice barely above a whisper. They are not here. He stepped into the room, his gaze sweeping across every detail in a way that told me he was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Then he said something that made everything click into place. Or he never came back here tonight. I froze, because he was right. If Noah had not been in this room, then whoever was waiting would not find what they expected. And that meant one of 2 things. Either the plan had already failed, or someone had changed it before they even knew they needed to. I exhaled slowly, then turned toward the hallway again, my mind racing through every moment since I had heard that first sound. I had moved him, earlier, before any of this. A small decision, a quiet instinct. I looked back at Adrian, meeting his eyes with something that felt dangerously close to certainty. He is not where they think he is, I said. And for the first time that night, that felt like the only advantage we had. The difference between chaos and control is not strength, it is preparation. And in that moment I realized I had been preparing for something like this without even knowing it. Adrian stepped out of Noah's room first, his movements quiet but faster now, his attention already shifting beyond the empty space we had just confirmed. He did not ask me how I knew. He did not question my decision. That meant one thing. He had already accepted it, which meant we did not have time to explain anything. I moved ahead of him again, turning away from the main hallway and toward the back corridor that led to the service areas, my pace steady but purposeful. If they were still inside, then they were not searching randomly. They were waiting for the right moment, the right signal, and the longer we stayed where they expected us to be, the closer we moved to that moment. We need to move where they are not looking, I whispered, keeping my voice low as I pushed open the narrow door that led into the secondary passage behind the kitchen. He followed without hesitation. That was the second time he had done that. I felt it, even if I did not acknowledge it. Trust was forming not from words but from decisions. The corridor here was tighter, the ceiling lower, the walls lined with storage cabinets and maintenance panels that most people never noticed. This was the part of the house that did not care about appearances. This was where things worked. I slowed near a corner and reached out, brushing my fingers lightly against the wall where a small, nearly invisible seam ran along the paneling. There. I pressed gently, and a narrow section shifted inward with a soft click. Adrian's gaze moved to it immediately, sharp, assessing. A hidden access panel. I had found it my second week here while cleaning, and I had never told anyone. I did not even know why I kept it to myself. Until now. It leads to the lower service route, I said quietly. It connects to the laundry and the rear utility stairs. He studied the opening for half a second, then nodded once. Go. I slipped inside, the space just wide enough for one person at a time, the air cooler and slightly metallic, like it had not been disturbed in hours. I could hear his footsteps behind me, measured and controlled, never touching the walls, never brushing against anything that might create sound. We moved in silence, the kind that felt alive, each second stretching longer than it should. Then I heard it again. Not ahead of us this time. Above. A faint shift. A step. Not loud. Not careless. But there. Someone moving where they thought no one else would be. I stopped immediately and raised my hand. Adrian halted behind me without question. I tilted my head slightly, listening harder, isolating the sound from the stillness around it. One step. Then nothing. Waiting again. I leaned closer to the wall, tracing the direction in my mind, mapping it against what I knew of the layout. That was not random movement. That was positioning. They are still here, I whispered. And they are adjusting. He did not respond right away. When he did, his voice was lower than before, almost thoughtful. They did not find him. No, I said softly. And now they are trying to understand why. That changed everything. Because confusion created hesitation. And hesitation created openings. I moved forward again, slower now, more deliberate, following the passage until it opened slightly into a concealed viewing gap that looked into the lower hallway near the laundry area. I crouched just enough to see through it. The hallway beyond was empty. Light steady. Doors closed. Nothing out of place. But I knew better now. Nothing out of place did not mean nothing was wrong. It meant everything had been arranged to look that way. I glanced back at Adrian, my voice barely audible. If they cannot find Noah, they will not leave. They will wait. He held my gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod, the kind that confirmed he had already reached the same conclusion. Then we wait differently, he said. And in that moment I understood what that meant. We were no longer reacting to their plan. We were stepping into it, quietly, carefully. And for the first time that night, we were not just trying to avoid what was coming. We were preparing to meet it before it reached us. The safest place in a house like this is never the place that was meant to keep you safe. It is the place no one thinks to look. I shifted away from the narrow viewing gap and continued down the concealed passage, my steps slower now, more intentional, because the next move mattered more than anything we had done so far. If they were adjusting, then we needed to move before their adjustment became a new plan. The passage turned once more and opened toward a secondary panel that led directly into the industrial laundry room, a space most people in the main house never entered. I reached for the latch and paused, listening one last time. Nothing. Not even the faint shift we had heard earlier. I eased the panel open just enough to slip through and stepped into the room. The soft hum of the machines, the first real sound I had heard in minutes. It grounded me immediately. Familiar. Predictable. Real. I turned slightly, scanning the space, and then I saw him. Noah was exactly where I had left him, sitting on the low folding table near the far wall. His small hands wrapped around the edge like he was holding on to something steady. His eyes lifted the moment he saw me, wide but not panicked, just searching, waiting. I moved to him quickly, dropping to my knees in front of him, keeping my voice soft but clear. "Hey, you are okay?" I whispered, brushing a hand lightly against his shoulder. He leaned into me without hesitation, his grip tightening on my sleeve as if I was the only solid thing in the room. Behind me, I felt Adrian enter, his presence filling the space without sound. For a moment he did not speak. He did not move closer. He just stood there, taking in what was in front of him. I could feel it, even without looking. The shift in him again, quieter this time. Deeper. I glanced back over my shoulder. He was watching Noah, but his gaze moved once, briefly, to me. Not questioning. Not doubting. Observing. Understanding something he had not expected to see. I turned back to Noah, keeping my tone steady. "You remember what I told you earlier, right?" I said softly. "Stay quiet. Stay here. No matter what you hear." He nodded against my shoulder, small but certain. "Good," I whispered. You are doing exactly right. I felt Adrian step closer then, just enough that he was within arm's reach. But he did not interrupt. He did not take Noah from me immediately. That hesitation mattered. It meant he was choosing how to move next, not reacting. That meant we still had control. I looked up at him, lowering my voice again. They have not found him, I said. That is why they are still here. If he had been where they expected, this would already be over. His jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained even. Then they will not leave until they understand why he is not. Exactly, I replied. And that gives us something they do not have. Time. Not much, but enough. He glanced toward the door, then back at Noah, then at me again, the calculation in his eyes sharpening into something more defined. A decision forming. You moved him before you knew, he said quietly. It was not a question. I shook my head slightly. I heard something earlier. It did not feel right. I did not wait to confirm it. That was enough. Another pause. Short. Focused. Then he nodded once. A small, controlled motion that carried more weight than any words. You trusted your instinct, he said. I met his gaze, holding it for just a second. I had to, because no one else knew yet. That was the truth of it. In this entire house, filled with systems and security and people trained to respond, I had been the only one who noticed the silence. The only one who moved before the plan reached its next step. I turned back to Noah, gently easing his grip on my sleeve. You are going to stay here a little longer, okay? I said softly. We are going to fix something and then I will come back for you. He hesitated for a second, then nodded again, trusting in a way that felt heavier than it should. I stood up slowly, stepping back just enough to give Adrian space. He crouched slightly, placing a hand on Noah's shoulder, his voice low but steady. Stay here. Do exactly what she told you. No questions. Noah nodded once more. That was all it took. Adrian straightened, his attention shifting back to me, and for the first time, there was no distance in his expression. Only alignment. Then we changed the plan, he said quietly. I nodded, because now, for the first time that night, we were not just ahead of them. We were somewhere they had not even considered looking. And that meant the next move was ours. Perfect systems do not fail loudly. They fail by looking exactly the way they are supposed to. I stepped back into the concealed passage with Adrian just behind me, easing the panel closed until it sealed without a sound, cutting off the soft hum of the laundry room and returning us to the quiet that had started all of this. But now the silence felt different. Before, it had been a warning. Now, it was something we could use. Adrian moved ahead this time, his pace controlled, his attention already shifting toward the next step, and I followed half a step behind, watching the way he adjusted his movements to the space instead of forcing it to adjust to him. That was new. That was because of what he now understood. We reached the narrow viewing gap again, and he leaned just enough to look through it, his eyes scanning the hallway beyond with a precision that felt almost mechanical. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. Everything was exactly the way it should be, which meant everything was wrong. He pulled back slightly and glanced at me. Show me the system access, he said quietly. I nodded and turned, guiding him further down the passage until it opened into a small maintenance room tucked behind the main control corridor. The door here was not locked. It never was, because no one thought to check it. Inside, the air was cooler, filled with the low hum of equipment running continuously, screens mounted along the wall displaying camera feeds and system logs in clean, organized grids. At first glance, everything looked perfect. Every camera active, every hallway accounted for, every exterior angle covered. Adrian stepped forward, his eyes moving quickly across the screens, reading information faster than I could follow. Then he stopped, not because something was wrong, because nothing was. He leaned closer to one of the monitors, studying the rotation logs, the timestamps, the movement patterns. His hand lifted slightly, hovering just above the console without touching it, as if he was tracing the logic behind what he was seeing instead of the data itself. It is too clean, he said under his breath. I moved beside him, looking at the same screen, trying to understand what he meant. Everything looks normal, I said. Exactly, he replied. That is the problem. He tapped lightly on the edge of the console, not enough to make noise, just enough to mark the moment. In a real system, there are always small inconsistencies. A delay, a mischeck, a variation in timing. But this is perfect. His gaze shifted to me, sharper now. Perfection means it has been rewritten. Not broken. Controlled. From inside. The words settled into place with a weight that made my chest tighten. 'Cause I already knew what that meant. Whoever was behind this was not just inside the house. They were inside the system. And that meant access. Authority. Trust. Adrian moved again. This time faster. Pulling up a deeper layer of logs. His fingers moving with quiet precision as he filtered through override permissions and access points. The screens changed. Lines of data shifting into something more specific. More focused. He stopped again, this time longer. His expression did not change, but something behind it did. A realization forming. There are only 3 people who can do this, he said quietly. Me, the head of security. And he did not finish the sentence right away. He did not need to. I felt it before he said it. The same way I had felt the silence earlier. Damien Cross, he said finally. The name landed without force, but it carried impact all the same. The man who had been here longer than most of the staff. The one who moved through the house like he belonged to every room, every system, every decision. The one everyone trusted without question. I watched Adrian closely, waiting for a reaction, but there was none. Not outwardly. He did not show anger. He did not show disbelief. If anything, he became even more still, as if he was placing that information into a larger structure only he could see. I spoke carefully, keeping my voice low. If it is him, then this is not about opportunity. Adrian's eyes met mine. Then he finished the thought. He created it. The room seemed smaller suddenly, the hum of the machines louder, the screens brighter, like everything around us had shifted into sharper focus. Because now we were not dealing with someone inside the house. We were dealing with someone who had designed what was happening from the beginning. Adrian straightened slightly, his attention moving away from the screens and back toward the passage we had come through. Then we stopped following their plan, he said quietly. I nodded once. And we make them follow ours. For the first time since the night began, the silence did not feel like something we had to survive. It felt like something we could control. The most dangerous betrayal is not the one you expect. It is the one you built your life around without ever questioning it. Adrian did not move immediately after saying Damien's name. He stood there for a second longer, not frozen, not uncertain, but calculating at a level that made everything feel slower around him. I watched his expression carefully, waiting for something to break through. Anger, disbelief, anything that would show this was unexpected. But there was nothing like that. Only focus, only control. That told me more than any reaction could have. This was not impossible to him. This was just something he had not confirmed until now. He turned back to the console, pulling up another layer of access logs. Deeper this time, his movements precise, efficient, like he had done this 100 times before. I stepped closer, watching the screen as lines of data shifted again, narrowing down into something more specific. Names, timestamps, override commands. Everything tied together in a way that looked clean on the surface, but the more you focused, the more you could see the pattern beneath it. It was not random. It was structured, designed. He isolated one sequence and held it there, his voice low as he spoke. This override was triggered 32 minutes before I arrived. His finger moved slightly, tracing the line of data without touching it. It rerouted the camera feed in the West Wing and delayed the guard rotation by exactly 6 minutes. Not enough to trigger an alert. Just enough to create a window. I felt a chill settle in my chest. That was the click I heard. The moment everything shifted. I looked at him. That is when they came in. He nodded once. And they expected me to be somewhere else. His gaze lifted from the screen and met mine. Sharper now, more defined. Which means they were not improvising. They were following a plan that had already accounted for every movement in this house. I swallowed slowly, the weight of that realization settling deeper. Then they knew your schedule, I said. Not just tonight. Everything. He did not answer right away. He did not need to. The silence between us filled in the rest. Of course they did. Someone like Damien would not need to guess. He would know. Adrian shifted his focus again, pulling up another file, this one older, buried deeper in the system. The timestamps changed. Weeks, months, patterns emerging that had nothing to do with tonight, but everything to do with how long this had been building. I leaned in slightly, my voice quieter now. This was not sudden. No, he said. It was patient. The word hung there heavier than anything else. Because patience meant intention. And intention meant this was never about one moment. This was about something much bigger. Adrian stepped back from the console, his attention no longer on the screen, but on the structure of everything we now understood. Damien did not just open a door. Tonight, he said quietly, he built the path to it over time, adjusting small things, learning patterns, making sure no one noticed. I crossed my arms slightly, grounding myself in the reality of what that meant. Then this was never about getting in, I said. It was about waiting for the right moment to act once he was already inside. Adrian looked at me again, and this time there was something else in his expression. Not just calculation, recognition. You see it clearly, he said. I held his gaze. I have had to. Another brief pause. Then his voice dropped slightly, more controlled, more focused than before. If Damien created this, then he will not abandon it just because the timing changed. He will adapt. Which means he is still here, I said. Or close enough to control what happens next. Adrian nodded once, the decision already forming. Then we stop thinking like targets, he said. And we start thinking like the one who set the trap. I felt something shift inside me at those words. Not fear. Not uncertainty. Something steadier. Because for the first time we were not reacting to what was happening. We were stepping into the logic behind it. I glanced at the screens one last time, then back at him. If he thinks the plan is still intact, I said slowly, then we let him believe that. Adrian's expression sharpened. A faint change that told me I had reached the same conclusion he had. Exactly. The word was quiet, but it carried certainty. Then we control what he sees next. And in that moment, the night stopped being about what had already gone wrong. It became about what we were about to change. Truth does not arrive all at once. It reveals itself in pieces, and sometimes the most dangerous piece is the one you were never meant to see. I kept my eyes on Adrian for a second longer after he said we would control what Damien saw next, but something else had already started forming in my mind, something that did not belong to tonight alone. It was a pattern I recognized, not from this house but from years ago, from the way my father used to look at numbers like they were trying to tell him something no one else could hear. I reached slowly into my pocket and pulled out the folded receipt, holding it between my fingers before handing it to him without a word. He took it, his eyes scanning the handwritten message again, but this time with a different kind of attention, not just reading what it said, but understanding what it implied. He was not supposed to come home tonight. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, his gaze lifting from the paper back to me. This was not written by someone outside, he said quietly.
No, Irraplia.
It was written by someone who knew your exact schedule. Someone who expected it to stay unchanged. He nodded once, but I could see the thought moving deeper now, connecting this to everything else we had just uncovered. The timing, the system override, the positioning inside the house. All of it pointed in the same direction. Damien had not just planned an entry. He had planned a moment. And that moment had been built on certainty. I watched Adrian closely, then took a breath I did not realize I had been holding. There is something else, I said quietly. His eyes returned to mine immediately, sharper now. What? I hesitated, not because I did not know what to say, but because once I said it, there would be no way to take it back. This was not just about tonight anymore. This was about why I had come here in the first place. I reached into the inner pocket of my uniform and pulled out a second folded document, older, worn at the edges from being carried too many times. I held it for a second, then extended it toward him. This is why I came here, I said. He took it slowly, unfolding it with the same controlled precision he had shown all night. His eyes moved across the page, reading quickly, absorbing details faster than most people could process them. I watched his expression carefully, waiting for recognition. Came subtle but unmistakable. The name meant something to him. The firm, he said quietly. I nodded. It handled financial accounts connected to your operations years ago. His gaze lifted slightly, meeting mine again. And this matters why. I swallowed once, steadying myself. Because my father worked there. The words felt heavier out loud than they had in my head for years. His expression did not change, but his attention sharpened. What was his name? I held his gaze, not looking away this time. Daniel Carter. The silence that followed was different from before. Not empty, not waiting, full of something else. Recognition. Adrian's eyes shifted slightly, not away, but inward, like he was searching through something he had not looked at in a long time. I saw it then, the connection forming, the memory aligning with the name. That firm had an internal issue, he said slowly. Years ago, something flagged in the accounts. I nodded. He found it. Adrian's expression tightened just slightly, and then he disappeared. That is what the report said, I replied quietly.
À car accident.
Late night. Wet roads. No further investigation. Adrian looked back down at the document in his hands, then at the screen behind me, then finally at me again. You came here because you thought I was responsible, he said. It was not an accusation. It was a fact. I did not deny it. Yes, I said. The word was steady, even if everything else inside me was not. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Adrian spoke again, his voice lower, more focused than before. And now, I met his eyes, holding the moment exactly where it was. Now I think I was looking at the wrong person. The shift that followed was quiet, but it changed everything. Because now this was not just about stopping what was happening tonight. It was about understanding what had been hidden for years. And for the first time since I had walked into this house, I was no longer just trying to survive it. I was finally starting to see it clearly. The truth does not break you when you hear it. It breaks you when you realize how long it has been there without you seeing it. Adrian did not speak right away after I told him I had been looking at the wrong person, and that silence felt heavier than anything we had faced so far that night. Not because it was uncertain, but because it was precise. He turned back toward the system console slowly, his movements controlled, his attention shifting from me to the deeper layers of data as if the past and the present had just aligned into the same problem. His fingers moved across the interface again, pulling up archived records that had not been touched in years, buried beneath layers of updates and overwritten logs. The screen changed, older timestamps appearing, fragmented entries that looked incomplete at first glance, but the more he filtered them, the clearer the pattern became. I stepped closer without thinking, watching as names and transaction markers surfaced one by one, pieces of something that had never been meant to stay visible. There, he said quietly, his voice lower now, more focused than before. That is where it started. I followed his gaze, my eyes scanning the data until I saw it. A flagged account. A discrepancy. Small, almost insignificant if you were not looking for it. But my father would have seen it. I knew he would have. Adrian zoomed in further, isolating the transaction trail, tracing it back through layers of shell accounts and redirected funds. It did not take long. The path was clean. Too clean. Just like tonight. And at the center of it, one name appeared again. Damian Cross. The room seemed to narrow around us as that realization settled into place. Not as a shock, but as confirmation of something that had already been building beneath everything else. Adrian leaned back slightly, his eyes still on the screen, but his thoughts clearly moving beyond it. He found the discrepancy, Adrian said quietly. Your father. I nodded, my throat tightening even as I forced myself to stay steady. He would not have ignored it.
No, Adrián replied.
He would have reported it. Or tried to. The words landed with a weight that made everything else feel sharper, clearer, more defined. Because now it was no longer a question of what had happened. It was a question of what had been done to make sure no one else would see it. Adrian pulled up another file, this one partially erased, fragments missing but enough remaining to reconstruct the outline of what had followed. Internal review request. Unauthorized access alert. Then nothing. A gap. A silence in the record that matched the silence I had felt earlier in the hallway. Deliberate. Controlled. Removed. I exhaled slowly, the pieces locking together in a way that felt inevitable. He tried to expose it, I said quietly, and Damien stopped him before it could go anywhere. Adrian's gaze shifted to me, and for the first time, there was something in his expression that was not just calculation. It was recognition, not of the event, of the cost. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. He did not redirect the blame. That told me everything I needed to know. I had not just been wrong about him. I had been standing inside the truth the entire time without seeing it clearly. Adrian turned back to the screen, his voice steady, but quieter than before. This was never about removing a threat tonight, he said. It was about finishing something that started years ago. I nodded slowly, cleaning up what was left behind. Exactly. The word was soft but absolute. The silence that followed was no longer heavy with uncertainty. It was filled with understanding. The kind that changes everything without needing to raise its voice. I looked at the screen one last time, then back at him. Then this is not just about stopping him now, I said. It is about exposing what he has been hiding. Adrian's eyes met mine again, sharper now, but aligned in a way they had not been before. We do both, he said quietly. And for the first time since I stepped into this house, I was no longer chasing answers from the past. I was standing in front of them, and this time they were not hidden anymore. The most powerful move is not the one that stops the plan. It is the one that lets it continue just long enough to reveal who built it. Adrian did not rush after we uncovered the truth. That was the first thing that made me understand how different this moment was from everything before. He did not call his men. He did not trigger any alarms. Instead, he stepped away from the console and turned off 2 of the visible camera feeds with a quiet, deliberate motion. I watched him, realizing what he was doing even before he said it. You are letting him think it is still working, I whispered. Adrian nodded once. If Damien believes the system is still under his control, he will not change his position. He will come to finish what he started. His voice was calm, steady, but there was something beneath it now, something sharper than before. Not anger, not urgency, precision. I followed him back into the concealed passage, the darkness closing around us again, but this time it did not feel like something we were hiding in. It felt like something we were using. We moved without speaking, each step aligned, each movement intentional, until we reached the point where the hidden passage opened toward the main corridor near the east wing. Adrian stopped just before the opening and glanced at me briefly. This is where he will come, he said quietly. Not to search, to confirm. I nodded, understanding the logic. If the plan had been disrupted, Damien would not abandon it. He would come closer, to verify, to adjust, to take control again. Adrian shifted slightly into the shadow beside the wall, positioning himself where he could see without being seen. I mirrored him on the opposite side, my back close to the cool surface, my breathing steady, my focus locked on the narrow stretch of hallway ahead. Time stretched again, seconds longer than they should be. The house remained silent, but now I understood that silence differently. It was not waiting anymore. It was holding. Then I heard it. A step. Soft. Controlled. Familiar in the same way the earlier sound had been. Someone moving with purpose. Not caution. That meant confidence. That meant they believed the plan was still intact. The figure appeared at the far end of the hallway, stepping into the soft light without hesitation. Damien Cross. He looked exactly the way he always did. Composed. Unrushed. Like he belonged there. Like nothing had changed. That was what made it so clear. He was not reacting. He was continuing. His gaze moved briefly along the hallway, not searching, just confirming what he expected to see. Then he stepped closer, his attention shifting toward the direction of Noah's room. Adrian did not move. Not yet. He waited. And in that moment I understood why. Because this was not about catching him in motion. This was about letting him reveal intent. Damien slowed near the intersection, his posture unchanged, his expression unreadable, but there was something in the way he paused, something that did not match the calm exterior. A fraction of hesitation, a calculation. He knew something was different. Not enough to stop, but enough to notice. Adrian stepped out of the shadow then. Not abruptly, not aggressively, just enough to enter Damien's line of sight. The movement was quiet, controlled, but impossible to ignore. Damien stopped. For the first time since we had seen him, his stillness was not chosen. It was forced. Adrian did not raise his voice. He did not step closer. He simply stood there, his presence filling the space in a way that changed everything without a single word. The silence between them was no longer neutral. It was defined. Damien's gaze shifted slightly, taking in the details, the positioning, the fact that Adrian was here early, exactly where he was not supposed to be. The plan had not just changed. It had been seen. And in that moment, everything that had been hidden no longer needed to be explained. It was already understood. Adrian spoke then, his voice low, even, but carrying something that made the air feel heavier. You stayed. It was not a question. Damien did not answer immediately, but he did not deny it either, because there was nothing left to deny. The plan had reached its end. Not the way it was intended, but exactly where it had always been leading. The end of a plan does not sound like an explosion. It sounds like a quiet understanding that nothing will ever go back to the way it was. Damien stood there for a long second after Adrian spoke. His expression controlled but no longer effortless. The certainty he had walked in with beginning to fracture in ways he could not fully hide. I stayed where I was, still in the shadow, watching the space between them instead of either man directly, because that was where the truth lived now. Not in what they said, but in what neither of them needed to explain. Damien's gaze shifted once, briefly, as if measuring distance, timing possibilities that no longer aligned the way they had before. Then he exhaled slowly, almost like he was accepting something rather than resisting it. You were not supposed to be here, he said finally, his voice even, but missing the quiet confidence it had carried earlier. Adrian did not move closer. He did not raise his voice. He simply answered, just as calmly. And yet I am. That was all it took. Not a threat. Not an accusation. Just a fact that made everything else irrelevant. The silence stretched again, but it no longer belonged to uncertainty. It belonged to conclusion. Damien's posture shifted slightly, not in retreat, not in aggression, but in something else. Recognition. Not just that the plan had failed, but that it had been seen completely from the beginning to the end. You found, he said, quieter now. Adrian did not deny it. Years ago, he replied, just later than it should have been. That was when I saw it. Not anger, not regret. Something more complicated passing through Damien's expression. Something that suggested this had never been about a single night or a single decision. It had been building just like everything else in this house. Carefully, quietly, until there was no way to undo it. I stepped forward then, not fully into the light, but enough that my presence was no longer hidden. Damien's eyes moved to me, and for the first time, there was something there that had not been there before. Not recognition of who I was now. Recognition of something from before. Something he had not expected to see again. You, he said, almost under his breath. I held his gaze, steady, even though everything inside me felt like it was balancing on the edge of something I had been carrying for years. My father saw it first, I said quietly. The words landed differently than I expected. Not heavy, not sharp, just clear. Damien did not look away. He did not deny it. He did not try to explain it. Because there was nothing left to explain. Adrian remained still beside me, but I could feel the shift in him again. Not toward control this time, but toward something else. Resolution. The kind that does not need to be forced. It just settles. This ends here, Adrian said quietly. Not as a command. As a certainty. Damien nodded once. A small movement that carried more weight than anything else that had been said. It already did, he replied. And just like that, the tension that had been building all night did not disappear. It changed. It moved into something quieter. Something final. The house did not feel different. The walls were the same. The lights were the same. But the silence was no longer waiting. It was finished. Minutes later, as the first hint of early morning light began to touch the edges of the windows, everything that had been hidden started to settle into place. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. Adrian turned to me once the hallway was empty again. His expression no longer guarded in the same way it had been when the night began. He handed me the folded documents we had uncovered, along with something else, a sealed envelope. Everything you need is in there, he said. Records, accounts, enough to close what was left open. I looked at it, then back at him, my fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the paper. You are letting me walk away, I said quietly. He held my gaze for a moment. You already did, he replied. The words stayed with me longer than anything else that had happened. Because he was right. I had walked into this house looking for something, and somewhere along the way, I had found something else entirely. I glanced once more down the hallway, then back at him. Why did you stay, he asked. It was not a demand, not even a question he expected me to answer. But I did, because I finally understood who the danger was, I said softly. And for the first time I knew it was not you. Adrian did not respond right away. He did not need to, because in that moment nothing else needed to be said. The silence between us was no longer something to fear. It was something that remained, quiet, steady, and for the first time all night completely honest.